So you had mentioned also, so you ran into a lot of narcissistic guys because they reminded you of your mother.
Yep.
And when did you
I
get
even
the
married
awareness of
one.
it? Oh, and he's the father of,
Yes.
and that creates a whole
Oh,
nother
I have learned.
dynamic.
I want to say something positive about him. I have learned more about myself through my relationship with him than any other person on this planet, and for that I am very grateful for him. But it has been.
Right.
I'm still in litigation. I'm still in active litigation because of him, and it's put my entire life on hold. I can't live where I want to live. I can't send my kids. I can't educate my kids the way that we ultimately want to. And when I say we, I usually mean me and my kids. My kids and I live in what I like to call a benevolent monarchy, where they get to express their needs, and then I, the queen of our queendom, I make sure that their needs are heard and immediately addressed. But yeah, we're stuck because of him, and he wants full control, and it's just like even my business is on hold because of him, because he's trying to make it seem like I don't even know. He obviously doesn't understand my work. He obviously
No.
doesn't understand
Probably
what I do.
purposefully to a point. He doesn't
Yeah.
understand
He's
it.
never asked. He's never questioned. He's never probably even been on my website. Like it's witch trials. He's just trying to have control. And I think he's also really angry that I have success post divorce. Even though I've never received a dime of support from him. There all these other things, but yeah, I have not healed my wound yet, and so this is why it's so important, the work that you do, the work that we do, to help people work through these things before they get stuck in situations like I'm still stuck in this situation. Right. It's not going to go away. I have to learn how to accept it. I have to learn how to manage it. I have to learn how to do my best and just know that my kids are going to be great. They're fine through this. They're learning so much from this. But this is why the work is so valuable, because I didn't even realize my mother was a narcissist until I had to leave my marriage. Yeah, and that's when my eyes were opened. I saw the pattern for the first time. I remember that day so clearly. My mother and my husband were both attacking me, basically saying and doing the same thing, blaming me for their own refusal to take responsibility. And I was just almost stunned to witness it. And the next day I was like, okay, I have to leave this marriage. I have to heal this wound. And that's where the journey really began.
And when it comes to co-parenting and other times the family stuff, they're the most difficult situations because you can't just cut them off completely.
No,
and then
not even legally. You can't.
Right. There is no end to it.
Legally, I cannot move more than 25 miles away from him without a court order.
And that's why a lot of the people that watch me, they're in a similar position as that. They're stuck. Because a lot of people will say, when I talk about advice for dealing with narcissistic people, oh, just go no contact, leave them. That's the only thing you should do. It's like, well, duh. But
it's not
clearly,
a one-size-fits-all problem.
Good, exactly. They don't realize there's other variables. Not everyone can do that.
Nope, not everyone can do that. And we have to be really mindful with how we participate in these dynamics and how we speak about the narcissist parent.
Sure. Because
the children are listening.
Absolutely.
And we have to be, I could talk about that for days.
Yeah, I mean, and that does happen too. There can be an alienation from both sides. There could be a narcissistic one, and the person who's been abused may alienate just because they're so disgruntled with the person who's abused them, which is understandable. But
well, of course. I learned a lot from him and my mother, a lot, and I'm happy to say that I took it to heart, and I learned. You can learn a lot from a narcissist, and I think it's good to point out the good things too. What we can do, learning from a narcissist, we can really cultivate a very strong sense of self-worth. We can learn how to become immune to manipulation. I think this is one of the big ones. We can learn how to be more impeccable with our words and our integrity. Because the thing, dealing with a narcissist, you have no accountability, right?
You're making me
trust
think
what
of some
they say.
things.
Oh, I'm sure.
As you say it.
And what it helped me do is I had to get impeccable with how I communicated. I had to follow through on all my agreements, especially like I'm watching that, my kid's dad promise them things but never fulfill them, and I'm just like, okay, well, I got to make sure that I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna overpromise and underdeliver with my kids. They need to know that they can trust our relationship and our dynamic. They need to know what that looks like. There's a lot to learn because being raised by my mother, witnessing her example, I was oblivious to how much of her behavior I had taken on and adopted as my own.
From like a CPTSD or narcissistic fleas?
Well, she made a lot of excuses. She never once in my life did I ever hear my mother apologize or take responsibility for anything. No. Any form of accountability was perceived as a threat, and she played the victim. And this was my role model and example growing up, and I didn't realize that I was doing it until I started really going deep into personal growth work and realized that I was doing it too.
Right. And
not necessarily as a narcissist, but with that victim archetype, right? Making excuses, holding myself back. So that was huge. That was huge. And as I began taking my power back.
And that's the big difference though too, right? The people who have trauma, they can work on it and it gets better. Right. The people who are narcissistic, they don't even start the process for one. No. And then even if they did try, which is very rare anyway, they don't ever get to the point of collaboration and trying to work on themselves. So it just doesn't happen. Like they have to have very specific treatment plans for someone who's a narcissist. But trauma, if you work on it, can have a result that you have.
Yeah, it's a really complex thing.
Sure.
And one of the things that came up is on my healing path, as I was working on myself, I kept hitting these thresholds where I couldn't go any further because of the narcissist in my life. And then I had to confront things on a whole nother level. So I want to say this to your audience is I have a lot of empathy and compassion for people who are overcoming narcissist abuse because I understand how difficult it is, and you have to change every dynamic in your life. Anything that was created in this structure that these narcissists create to, validate their behavior, protect themselves and their image, and hide in the shadows, all of this stuff. Basically, I had to dismantle my life in order to build the life I really wanted, and it was the scariest, hardest thing I ever did in my life.
Bet.
And it's difficult, and I just want to be really clear. I don't want, just because I'm on the other side of it, I don't ever want to give the impression that it's easy. It's not easy, but you can do it.
And what you had me thinking about too is when you said you have to be really concise with your words, because the narcissistic people, when they're observing how you speak or your text, they got the microscope out and they go, and they're really good.
They're
like
really good.
It's really good training to be like a debater and a lawyer.
They're manipulators.
And so they know how to twist this and say, you got to really get super clear on what you're trying to communicate and then keep it simple, because they're great at steering it in a different direction. Or if your argument was a little weak in this spot, they poke and do something.
My God. You know what I learned from them? I used to be so heartbroken because I was so naive. I would just tell them about my plans. I'd tell them what I was going to do for my kids for their birthday, or what movie I wanted to take them, what gift I wanted to buy them. And both of them, my mother and my boy's dad, they would do everything they possibly could to do it first and take that opportunity away from me. I used to be so heartbroken. And then I got smart and I used it strategically. And so if I didn't want to spend the money, or I didn't want to take the kids to see a particular movie, I'd tell them, and sure enough, predictable, like clockwork, they would do it as quickly as possible, thinking that they were taking something away from me. And I was just like, excellent.
You need a Jurassic Park quote in there. Clever girl. Clever.
So you gotta use their manipulation to your own benefit and to your children's benefit. because it's exhausting and can be really depleting.
And that's a situation where I would say when you have to deal with them, you got to do what you got to do when you have to deal with them with co-parenting and whatever. Others can just leave, but when you're in that spot, you just can't.
You can't. And it's been a really hard life lesson for me, but it's cultivated a sense of resolve, an inner strength, and a resilience that I can't imagine having this any other way, because I would have done what I always did in the past and just up and go and do what I wanted to do. I can't now. I have to face it. I have to sit in the fire of this over and over again, and it has been so hard and painful, but man, it's given me so much. I can honestly say, Jared, I ain't afraid of shit anymore. Literally, I'm just like,
there you go.
Okay, we're gonna face this.
Then you're free, is what they would say.
I'm free, right? I'm not afraid, and yeah, and yes, I still break down and cry when I need to get it out, and then I pull up my big girl pants, and I'm like, okay, I got this. Let's keep going, and this too shall pass. And I mentioned to you this before, so I'll mention it really quick here. A miracle happened this year. And I don't want to say anything to disrespect my mother's memory, but my mother died unexpectedly this year. It was very sudden. I had no idea she was even sick because I hadn't been in contact with her for many, many years. Ever since she had been attacking me through the court system and through my boy's dad. And through her death, I had a profoundly healing experience where now whenever I think of her, I feel incredible peace and gratitude and healing. So I just want to speak this out. I want to speak this into the ethers for everybody to hear who needs to hear this, who's been going through this themselves. Healing is possible. And sometimes, yes, we have to wait until, they pass on. But not only was I able to experience this deeply profound forgiveness and peace with my mom, but I got my dad back. And the entire family has reunited. Even members of our family that haven't spoken in like 50 years.
Now, how did you get yourself to that mental place where you were able to get to that peaceful place with it?
That's a good question. Well, at this stage, processing is kind of like my default mode. I'm a transformation junkie. So when the shit comes up, I usually face it pretty quickly because I know that the only way out is through, and I know that it may be uncomfortable, but it's not going to kill me. And I like to work through the process because I know that I'll have peace on the other side of it. So it started with communicating with my father. It started with realizing, like, even though I was experiencing a large amount of relief mixed in with the grief of her dying and her death, my father was grieving and really beside himself. And I took myself out of it. I was like, okay, now is not the time to be self-absorbed.
Right.
And I suspended all of our history and I communicated with him with compassion. And it opened the door for everything to be redone. I didn't say anything to him other than listen to him, asked him what he needed, confirmed, validated his experience, and sure enough, before she even officially passed, he was like, I really want to reconnect. I want to do over. I want to start over again. I want to reconcile. And I was like, okay, that happened quicker than I expected.
And you were ready for that. You were
I'm ready, yeah.
had let go of, I guess, resentment towards what maybe he wasn't before.
I always knew my father could not stand up to my mom. 2 reasons. One, she would destroy his life, destroy his career, take everything from him, slander his name to anyone who would hear. She would destroy him like she did me. And 2, because he loved her, he genuinely loved her. He loved that woman. He just gave her everything he could, including his self-worth and power over him. And so I knew this at this point in my life, and I acknowledged it, and I could see it. So the other thing is, I'm at a point in my life where it's actually really easy for me to forgive. I have no problem with forgiveness. I, often need to forgive from a distance. I don't allow the behavior to perpetuate.
Sure.
But it's easy for me to forgive because I also understand trauma. I understand childhood wounds. I understand how they operate. I understand that it is not our fault. The things that happen to us, especially as children, it's our responsibility to heal, but not everybody's up for it. So it is easy for me to forgive. And so my father has been amazing. My mom passed in April. He has been so consistent. He's like, I know you can't trust me right away. A lot of harm has happened. Just know that you have my undying support, and I'm going to do my best to be consistent and to make amends and to rectify this. And my dad is a man of integrity. He's a badass.
And that's how you know he was, though, because he was able to say it from that humble perspective. Like, hey, I know you might not be ready for it right away, but I'm willing to take care of what I can take care of. He's taking ownership. He's taking ownership of it, and that's what goes a far way.
Which was huge because my father could not see my mother's behavior and everything that went down until she no longer had a grip on his perspective. Once that filter fell and he was able to see me and listen to me, it was almost like the veil was lifted. You know what it reminded me of? Oh my God. What's his name? King Leonidas from the Two Towers from the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah.
Remember when he was under the spell of Saruman?
Yep.
And as soon as it lifted, the color came back and
Yep.
he could see everything, and he was just like, okay, let's fix it all. It's my fucking dad this year.
I could see that, absolutely. Because it is
wonderful.
like a spell.
It
is,
spell.
and I honestly think sometimes, whether it's drugs or with like a narcissistic person,
Yeah.
that's where those kinds of stories came from.
Yeah.
People like that,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
almost very similar to being
It's like an
demonically
infection.
possessed in a way.
Yeah, it's like an infection where they get into people's minds and they're able to.
Yeah, it's a mind virus.
It really is.
And the other thing you got me thinking about there was, so after you got out of that narcissistic relationship, did you struggle not finding new narcissistic people attractive?
My God.
Because that's what I hear a lot.
I went through a gamut. There were 2 relationships after my divorce that had similar patterns. Taught me a lot. Yeah, no, it was really hard. And what I really needed to do was take some time for myself. I had a lot of healing work to do. I mean, I think healing is perpetual. I have a favorite Reverend Edwin Gaines. She's got a retreat center in Valley Head, Alabama. We used to do fire walks, and she's badass. I need to check in on her because she's got to be really old right now.
I don't know if I've heard of her.
No, she's great. But she would always say in her Texan accent, honey, you know how you can tell you still have healing work to do? And we'd all really lean in, like, oh my God, give us the answer, oh guru. And she'd be like, do you still have a body? So I'm a firm believer that, we have a lifetime of healing work to do. We're not going to run out.
It never ends.
And, it gets fun, it gets funner, it gets easier. You get to play. I like to play in transformation now rather than it be this brutal, shedding of my skin and my identity.
It's a good one to remember, too, because I think a lot of people, when they're struggling, they're taking life a little too seriously and taking themselves too seriously.
I mean, you can't blame them. Can't blame them. It's heavy.
It is.
But it gets easier.
But that's also, I think, it all contributes to that. Like, if you could find a way to get through the work and then develop that playful attitude,
God,
that's where the fun is. That's where the real life is at that point. And I think what I hear with the women who come to me is a lot of them, they get to this place, like you just said, they have a really hard time finding a healthy guy fun. That's too boring for them or something like that.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Right? Because steady, reliable, responsible, it can come across as boring to those of us who are raised in chaos.
Right.
And it is problematic. It's
the hardest thing I
really
see them struggle with.
It's really challenging. Yes, and I have a lot of compassion for that because, I get it. And I can't share the solution, but I can share one thing that has worked for me. And for me is, what I do is I work to create a balance in my life so that I have all sorts of stability and order and structure And then I make sure I infuse it with a lot of playfulness, a lot of fun. I have a lot of adventures. My life is crazy, you know. I'm not gonna slow down in some ways, you know.
Right.
Like I'm very healthy now and happy, and I'm not doing anything self-destructive. But I need a certain level of adventure and
Sure.
nuance and new experiences every day. So I take responsibility to giving those to myself and not looking for those in a partner.
I think that's a good way to see it, because I think if they could do that, a lot of it would take care of itself a little bit. And I mean, I get it, because I'm someone, I've probably had borderline tendencies, narcissistic tendencies, and you know it. And so what happens, though, is this, and this is what I describe it as. So when I meet some women who are cluster B, there's this kind of like synergy thing that kind of happens a little bit. And it's like the energy sparkles.
Yeah.
And it's like they're the ones in color and everyone else is in black and white.
Yes.
And when I ask you that question, it's for myself too, because I can still feel that way sometimes. It's like that the energy can snap, crackle, and pop with certain people, and then others it just doesn't. But the ones it doesn't mean it would be an unhealthy relationship.
Right.
It'd probably be a very healthy relationship.
It'd be very grounding, very safe. The other thing is, if we are taking responsibility for our fun, we're going to be interacting with other people who need that kind of adventure and fun, and we're going to find ourselves with more healthy people who have that kind of childlike enthusiasm there.
And that's what I would say to people too. It's like, find someone who's been through some shit and they've done some work. They're going to be the ones that are the most equivalent to where you are.
Absolutely. And they're gonna hopefully be more understanding as well.
I would say.
And less judgmental.